Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth. I am a bookseller at Belmont Books. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, we are an independent bookstore in the Boston area, in Belmont, Massachusetts, to be exact. We actually have a lot of events like this. I know some of the upcoming events, there's going to be a Sunday, there's going to be a virtual book launch for Dolly Parton and James Patterson's new book. On the 10th, there's also going to be a book launch for local author John Papernick's new book, I Am My Beloveds. And then I believe on the 14th, we are having our monthly book club discussion for the Overstory. And those are just some of the events that we have. And I can send everyone the link to our events page so you can sign up and see what else we might be having. And then today's event is a book launch for Maia Weinstock and her new book, Carbon Queen, which is about Mildred Dresselhaus, a physicist from MIT who was hugely influential in the field of nanoscience and inspirational to women in STEM. I will also provide the link so you can buy the book. We also have, in addition to Maia, welcome, we also have Anna Frebel, who is a physics professor at MIT, and you can also see her book in the link and purchase that. Maia is just a second. Okay, Maia is an editor, writer, and producer of science and children's media whose work has appeared in Scientific American, Discover, Space.com, BrainPop, and Scholastic's Science World. She is deputy editorial director at MIT News, a lecturer on MIT on the history of women in STEM, and creator of Lego's Women of NASA. And then Anna Frebel, who I've mentioned is a physics professor at MIT, also her field is astronomy, and she specializes in what she calls stellar archaeology, some of the oldest objects in the known universe. And for questions, I'm going to ask that you type your questions into the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen. There is also the chat, which we would prefer that you use the Q&A, but we will answer questions from there too. We'll answer all of our questions right at the end, so around 7:45. And without further ado, I am going to turn the discussion over to Maia and Anna. I'm really excited to hear what they have to say.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a very long time coming with this book, and just having everybody here. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Anna, for helping celebrate this launch. Yay.
Yes, I'm very excited to be here. And of course, I have to show the book. This is Maia's book. We've been waiting for so long. Very exciting journey. And I'm so glad that we get a chance to talk about the book today. I only met Millie once, but every time I go to, so I'm an astronomer here at MIT, but when I go visit my physics colleagues, I have to go through building 13 and take the elevator up there. And every time I step out of the elevator, when I turn around the corner, there are two pictures of Millie on the wall, one as a young woman and one close to the one, in the older age as there's on the cover. And even though I've only met her once, but knowing about her and knowing that Maia was writing the book, it's such a feel-good thing. It's just a corkboard and they're just like stapled on there. But it's wonderful to know that she's watching over all of us. And with that, I want to kind of dive right in and ask Maia to tell us a little bit more about the viral advertisement from GE that you start your book off with. I remember seeing it, and I knew what had just happened a few days prior, and so it was very, very moving for me, and I think also for many other people. But this idea of having a scientist being portrayed at the Super Bowl as an A-list celebrity, that filled my heart. So I want to know more.
Yeah. So for those who haven't taken a chance to look at the book yet, we do start with a vignette of this ad that happened in 2017. And just to give some context to what Anna was saying, it had been in the works for a while, and Millie was recruited to sort of be the face of this advertisement by GE. And it was celebrating women in science and women in engineering in the STEM fields. And, you know, she was made to be like this A-list celebrity, like someone who would have 1 million followers on every social media platform, and people would follow her every word and tweet. And, you know, she couldn't go down the street without being asked for an autograph. And, you know, it was very sad because it played for the first time right as she passed away, actually, right in 2017 in February. And, you know, it was extremely moving because anybody who knew her backstory already, it was sort of like the culmination of her life's work in the sense of, you know, she gets this international platform at the Oscars, or actually, I think the first playing was during a Saturday Night Live telecast. And just the idea that, you know, people might be interested in scientists and engineers for what they have to say in the same kind of way that we revere, or at least have a good time watching and listening to the social media conversations of celebrities. I think that, you know, is something that is happening a little bit more now. I think there are a lot of scientists on Twitter, and that there's a whole science Twitter community, and that's great. But in terms of, you know, Millie's background, that was definitely an event that, you know, sort of served for those of us, again, who knew her background a little bit, as like, you know, a bittersweet send off, I would say. And I wanted to open it, and it opened, and not to be total spoiler alert, but I do mention it later in the book too. I thought it was a nice bookend to kind of describe that that way of seeing Millie, or, you know, as sort of a stand-in, as someone who represented a woman who really defied her expectations of her when she was growing up. And, you know, at that time, she was born in 1930, you know, girls were not expected to be professionals in many ways. There were a few professions that they were accepted in, but extremely few. And so for her to have gone from that background to becoming an extremely influential scientist, and, you know, the GE ad really just barely touches the surface of what she actually accomplished. But, you know, she made a remarkable turnaround. And I think that was one of the reasons. Yeah,
she should have had 1 million followers on Twitter. So
well,
to me,
yeah,
it really was, it was just so appropriate, because it wasn't a big extrapolation. It was just the natural progression of her life and her achievements. And so to me, it didn't feel kind of, you know, faked. It was just what it was. It just, you know, presented in this very cheerful and wonderful way. And yes, I want a Millie Barbie, please, for my birthday.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Millie definitely was not a huge, she was not a technophile, let's say that. But, and I do mention that a little bit in the book. But, you know, if she had been coming up in like the current generation of young scientists and engineers, and let's say she had been on social media, I think, you know, she would have had it would have been interesting to see her following. But yeah, I thought that was a good way to kind of start off, and then kind of dive a little bit into her background, which is really remarkable. So
yeah, no, I thought that's a really wonderful opening, again, because many of us have, you know, seen the ad and can remember it, and that makes it all just so much more tangible.
Yeah.
So I mean, following that, have you met her? What, do you have a personal connection with her as well?
Yeah, I did actually meet her, but only one time. I saw her a few times just walking around MIT, but I really only had one discussion with her. And some people know that I have this hobby of making scientists and engineers into little Lego minifigures. And I had made one of her, I don't remember what year I made it, but I had joined the MIT staff in 2014. And shortly after I joined, I, reached out and just let her know about it. And she emailed me back like immediately saying, I have a picture of it on my bulletin board, and it got, people comment about it all the time. So that was really cool that she already knew about it. And she invited me to her office in Building 13, which is actually very close to my office as the crow flies. So yeah, I headed on over there and just thought it would be a very quick handoff. I've, made a bunch of these throughout the years, and most of the time I just meet the person and, we chit chat for a few minutes and that's pretty much it. So I kind of expected that, but Millie really, she invited me into her office. She was super gracious and she sat me down and, wanted to know more about me and just my work and my background with the Legos. And it turned out, we had a bunch of things in common in general. And now I will tell you, I really did not know anything about her background at this time. And I certainly was not thinking about writing a book about her. So, I remember she had wonderful mementos from all around the world. I think she had a bunch of Japanese, for lack of a better word, tchotchkes and beautiful, beautiful ornamentations and gifts and pieces of artwork and things like that. And I remember, she showed me this one beautiful piece that had been carved out and it was Japanese. And I said, oh, have you been to Japan? Little did I know, of course, at this time, of course, she's been to Japan like 100 million times, but she was super gracious. And she was like, yes, of course. We both grew up in New York. And so we had that in common. And we were both interested in women in science and just supporting women in science. And so I was there for easily half an hour, if not more. And, took a picture and she promptly put the little Lego among her prized awards. So that felt really nice. And unfortunately, I did not get an opportunity to see her or speak to her again. But she certainly left a wonderful impression. And I know people who wish that they had had an opportunity to meet her. And so when I was approached about writing this book, I jumped at that opportunity, and I really appreciate that from my colleagues at the MIT Press who suggested, they actually suggested they were considering a few options of biographies of women in science, and Millie's name really stood out to me. So I was very excited to take that on.
Yeah, wonderful. I just want to show everyone the picture because it's just so wonderful. So this is Millie with the Lego figure in her hand there, and couple wonderful color pictures in the middle. Here is the figure, a little bit larger with the buckyballs, and of course also I cannot pass on this one here with former President Obama. We have that picture very large in our physics community room. It is the only one in color. It's also the only woman. So we, as I said, Millie keeps watching all of us. Wonderful. You touched on that a little bit. If now you dug into her life and you're the expert probably on her life outside of her family, of course. If you were to meet her in the hallway again and struck up a conversation, what would you ask her?
Well,
so I'm putting you a bit on the spot here, but
yeah, what would I ask her? There are a few things that, well, first of all, I'd have to ask her what she thinks of the book, because, you just hope that you've done justice to this person's life. And, I hope that, she and her family are you know, okay with how it came out. You know, it was the kind of book where you kind of, I had a mandate of, I had a word count, right? So I had to stick to my word count, and you don't really know exactly, you know, which kind of audience you want to focus on. There's so many different angles you could go. So certainly would be welcome to know what you would think about it. But in any case, you know, I really didn't know anything about her background and her upbringing when I started writing this book. And I think I would want to know a little bit more about what it was like growing up in New York City in the Depression era, at a time when, you know, I mean, she was born in Brooklyn, but she was raised in the Bronx. And you know, you see old timey photos of New York City, and that's really the New York that she grew up in. And you know, I actually had a wonderful time discovering where she actually lived when she was a baby in Brooklyn. And it's this crazy part of Brooklyn that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it's the land is there, but nothing else is there. It's this area right by the Brooklyn Bridge, and it's just completely different from what it used to be. And you know, she of course would not remember that if I spoke to her now too well, just because she was so young when she lived in Brooklyn. But you know, I'd be curious to know, you know, what it was like living in a tenement building essentially in the Bronx. And I mean, she's told many stories about just her jaunts around New York City, and her time going to music classes in Greenwich Village. But I would just love to hear a little bit more from her about like the aura of living at that time. It's kind of a New York that doesn't exist anymore in many ways. And yeah, I lived in New York for quite a few years and was born in the suburbs. So I would be curious about that. But, you know, also just with her work, there's sort of a magic to how she made everything happen. She was asked for so many projects to work on, whether research projects, but also she was asked toward the end of her life so many sort of favors, and not in a bad way, like not in a I need this way, but you know, she was so influential in so many different realms that she tried to use that influence as much as she could, whether it was you know, serving as on a committee, like a national level committee, or a smaller committee that was, you know, looking at, you know, increasing diversity on physics faculties across the country, or whatever it was. You know, I really would love to know like how she really made everything happen in like with finite amount of time. And you know, it's just remarkable how much she actually was able to accomplish in terms of the scientific output that she did have. And she had about, I think it was 1,700 papers to her name, co-authored, which is astounding. Yeah. But then, you know, she did so many other activities. Her CV is just, you know, pages and pages long. I mean, even just in writing this book, I really had to pick and choose a lot. Like you know, I remember first starting getting some background materials and names of people to reach out to. And it was just so huge. There were just so many people and stories about Millie that it was just so hard to pick. I mean, I could have written easily twice as much as I did. So yeah.
Is there anything cool that you had to leave out that you know would like to add?
Sure.
Just more details on.
Yeah, I think it would have been nice to have a little bit more time to go into like what happened to her family, her nuclear family from childhood. You know, what happened to her. She grew up with a brother who was also a very successful scientist. In fact, he was so sort of precocious that even when she was a child, that she didn't want to like go too close to his example, because she was afraid that she would not be able to live up to what, you know, he was accomplishing. And so he was a very accomplished musician, but then he ended up going into nuclear science. And so it would have been nice to have a little bit more space to go into that, but you do have to pick and choose and make some choices, and that would have taken a little extra time. And you know, also her parents didn't go too much into what happened to her parents, and my understanding is that they did fine toward the end of their lives, and they were not, in the destitute situation that they were at the beginning, when certainly, well, at the beginning of their time in New York, when the Great Depression was in full swing. But that's something I did not, unfortunately, have room to do too much justice to, but that's just one aspect. I think, I could have easily gone into more of her discoveries and her individual papers that she worked on. But again, unfortunately, I had room for a few greatest hits, as well as just some of her other accomplishments in other realms, not just what she published, but also, how she really influenced the people she worked with, her students, her postdocs, and the people that she connected with as a leader in, national organizations and things like that.
Yeah, I bet it was also a bit of a privilege to having to make the hard choices of just picking a few of the so many accomplishments that she had. It must have been quite a rich experience for you to learn about all these things and then pick what is sort of most tangible and presentable, to really give the full and well-rounded picture of Millie that you have given us in your book.
It was hard, but I will say, I leaned quite a bit on interviews that she had given in the past, and there became some stories that she talked about in regard to her research that kind of came up again and again, and those sort of naturally rose up to the top in terms of, okay, we need to mention this. Not only because in some cases it was because they were highly influential in her field in nanoscience, and in other cases they were just important to her clearly, and they just had an effect on her life. So I feel like I had a little bit of help just because there was a lot of material to work with in terms of past interviews of Millie, between press interviews she had given over the decades, and also oral histories she's done. She's done quite a few oral histories, both at MIT and other places. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to make sure that you really wrote the book that she would have wanted, right? Because if there were stories that were showing up again and again, clearly that had meaning, and this is what she would have wanted to probably have show up in a book. So I mean, I hope
so.
at least.
I certainly hope so. It's hard to say exactly what you would have wanted, but Millie was not one to seek the limelight. But I mean, there were even a few cases where she would like explicitly say like, oh, this is a story for history of science, and so that was a pretty clear cue. I will also say that Millie herself was something of a historian. I mean, she would, many of the publications that she made were sort of review articles. So for those who don't know, these are articles that sort of review what's in the literature already. And they're published in peer-reviewed journals, but they are more of a synthesizing of what's known and what's to come in a field. And she did this very regularly. And she also wrote a number of books that did the same thing. And they served in some ways as textbooks. I mean, some of them are basically textbooks. So, she clearly, and, together with her husband, Gene, who she worked very closely with on these projects, she had a good sense, I think, of the importance of like looking back to see how her field had developed since the beginning of it. I mean, the reality is she really did serve as a pioneer in her own field. And because of that, she had a unique vantage point to describe, what it was like when there were only like 3 or 5 carbon related papers in the US, back in the 60s or whatever, whatever small number it was compared to now, which is hundreds, thousands, I don't know exactly, but it's orders of magnitude higher. So
for sure.
Yeah. So clearly she, as someone who was there at the beginning, I think she's felt the sense that she had an opportunity to really give context to where the field had started and where things might be headed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important that regularly happens, because once you join the field as a younger person, you don't know what happened before you, and unless someone tells you.
Right.
It's just that the past doesn't exist because you're so drilled to run and to do good stuff that there's no time to look back and turn around and take a breather, and sometimes also learn from the past. And so I think it's great to hear that she did that, and I'm sure she served very many people with that. I just want to come back to the GE advertisement, because in some sense, I also understand that she was a very modest person, that she actually agreed to this advertisement because it, in some sense, you could say like, oh, perhaps it's a bit frivolous, to go out as a scientist and be portrayed, in such an ad. But I really admired her for having done that, because it just kind of needed to round out her career and her role and what she meant to all of us. Do you have any more thoughts on that? Was
Sure.
that to be an expected thing for her, or surprise, perhaps?
Well, for that particular ad, I think her family really came in and played a big role in convincing her to do it, especially in particular. I mean, she has 5 grandkids, and I think most of them are interested in some field of either math or science or engineering. And 4 of them are women. So one daughter or granddaughter in particular, excuse me, Leora, she actually did her PhD at MIT, and she was in close conversation with Millie at that time, just because of the proximity of being at MIT. And I think she really encouraged Millie to see that this was something, doing the ad was something that, even though Millie couldn't really understand, like she felt a little funny, like doing all the, the takes and being on a sound screen or whatever it is, a sound stage rather.
Wanted to be a fly on the wall there.
Yeah. So I think her granddaughter in particular, and probably her other granddaughters as well, and maybe her grandson, although I'm not as up on what he's doing these days, probably convinced her that it really was worth doing, and that the newest generation of scientists and the next generation, even those young girls who are considering fields like this, or who don't even really consider it yet, but just have something to see that they can kind of model themselves potentially on for the future. And for Millie, like she did press outreach even at the beginning of her career. I mean, she was so unusual to be a woman. I mean, she was like in Cosmo magazine in 1976, and as like an example of you can be an engineer too. And it's so she's been doing that for her whole career. She definitely sort of picked and choose as well, but she also made sure that furthering the science was top of mind, furthering what she was trying to do, but then also furthering the idea that if you can see it, you can be it, that line that we see and hear so much. And I think she was one who really, really subscribed to that point of view, and from the earliest times of her career. So toward the end, she probably didn't really understand social media, which was kind of just coming. I mean, it was established when she passed away, but I think she just didn't really understand it that much. But I mean, the fact is, it played on regular TV, but it also went pretty viral on social media at the time. So I think it had its intended effect. And yeah, so.
Well, wonderful. I want to switch gears just a little bit and actually just talk about the origin story of the book and you as a writer again. You had mentioned in passing that you were working with MIT Press to find a topic for a biography, but I'm just curious to learn a little bit more, because I find it so interesting to hear how people come to write a book, or choose that, and what sort of the calling is to pen such an opus.
Sure. Well, I was approached by my colleague, Jeremy Matthews, who is at the MIT Press. He's one of the acquisitions editors who focuses on physics and engineering, and I'm not sure his full beat. Sorry, Jeremy, if I'm forgetting one of them, but certainly physics is in his beat. And he reached out to me, and it sounded like the press was interested in focusing a little bit more on some underrepresented subjects, and also less represented authors in terms of, women, individuals of color who might not have had an opportunity to write books, as readily, and especially in the STEM fields. And so he came to me and suggested that, would you like to write a biography? And I said, well, yes, but do you have any specific ideas? Because I don't have, I wasn't something I was working on. And, I just had not been on my radar. So, but he came back and gave me a few ideas of people they were thinking of potentially doing biographies of, and Millie was one of them. And, she jumped out right away as someone who I thought it would be, well, first of all, since I had a little bit more of a background in her work and had a little bit more of a connection with her, I thought it would be a way for me to really get to know her better. And I also figured that being at MIT, I might have more easy access to some of her archival materials, whether through the MIT libraries or, just interviews that she's done through MIT Video Productions or even MIT News where I work. And yeah, and so we agreed to do that, and everybody sounded excited about it. And so we agreed to do that just about a little bit less than 5 years ago now. It was originally gonna take less, a couple of years maybe, but it took a little bit longer than a couple of years, in part just because just life gets in the way, and in part because, originally I was asked to write a very brief biography that did not necessarily have to have any original research, meaning you don't need to go interview anyone or, do any digging really. And I just had a hard time sticking with what was already out there and not really going further a little bit. And so I just felt like I had to do some actual original research. And so, it took a little bit longer, because that always takes a little longer to, do field trips, and
good things take time.
Things take time. Yeah. And then, we had the pandemic, and when the pandemic started, I was still working on citations, as an academic publisher, it's a little bit different from another publisher that doesn't necessarily need to have things be cited so carefully. And so that took a long time. And, so we finally made it. But it was definitely a long process. And I'm just super happy about how things came out. And I'm really appreciative of my colleagues. This is my first book, so I've never really experienced the whole process before, but just seeing how collaborative it is. There's definitely a chunk of time where it's just you and their computer. And that can be a lonely time for any author, especially when, you're also working a full-time job and have other responsibilities. But once I submitted the manuscript, it was really fun to see what all the people at the MIT Press really did with the manuscript. I've never, like I said, never written a book before. And, from the copy editors, which I expected, to then later people, because I am an editor myself, people who dealt more with marketing. My marketing pal, Nicholas, has been amazing. He's just been so fantastic. But there's so many other people who help him and who do marketing in other ways. So it's just been a real education in
it's
made. Yeah.
But it's good. Yeah, I didn't actually know the full story, so thank you, because whenever I heard, I remember years ago, right, that you were going to do this, and I was like, well, could there be anyone better than you doing it, right? And so I thought you had sought her out, but it sounds like Millie chose you.
I guess in some ways.
Of the press, so.
Yeah, I will say, every year, it was only a couple of years because she died after that, but every year after I started working at MIT, I would go like visit the outside of her office the night before the Nobel Prizes, because her name was regularly brought up as a potential candidate. And, you know, I just thought it was a little bit of like mojo that I would just go over there on my way home and just be like, please let it be Millie. And of course, she never actually won the Nobel Prize, but you know, I kind of felt that I had this connection with her a little bit, just, you know, in the sense that I don't have that connection with too many other scientists that I would be reporting on. And so, yeah, that.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a really busy night or phase when they get announced.
Yeah.
Shouldn't she really have gotten one? I mean, we know of so many women who've been glossed over by this prize.
Yeah.
Who is happy about that? Yeah.
Well, so, I mean, I don't think it would have necessarily been undeserved if she were given a Nobel Prize that were sort of in the lifetime achievement kind of category, especially with so many like key discoveries that she you know, accomplished in her career. But the reality is that I really dug a little bit more deeply into this as I was writing the book. You know, she made many of the smaller, but yet still extremely important and consequential discoveries that sort of, in many cases, came like before, in some cases, directly before that, you know, that crucial discovery. And so, you know, she made many like influential changes to her field, but she didn't in the same way that, you know, the folks who did win for carbon nanostructures, you know, she wasn't the one who isolated graphene, but she was so influential in that discovery, which was given the Nobel Prize in, I believe it was 2010. You know, she was invited to the ceremony as an honored guest of one of the winners who, you know, had cited her as, you know, a significant influence. So, you know, she didn't win a Nobel. I think she did win many other prizes, and you know, she won the Kavli Prize in 2012. It was 10 years ago this year, and that was a really fantastic prize. You know, it's given in 3 subject areas, including nanoscience, and she actually was the first person who won it all by herself. And you know, I think that if she needed any pomp and circumstance, which I'm sure she didn't even feel like she needed because she did win so many awards over her life, but if she ever thought she was missing anything, I think that really would have covered it. I mean, she basically met the King of Norway and all of these other things. So she didn't win the Nobel, but I think she was recognized in so many other great ways.
Yes, and we're glad for it. We have a few minutes left to chat, and of course we have to talk about her actual science and achievement. Yeah. So we cannot leave this out. What could you summarize for us what you alluded already a little bit to it, what her most important contributions are?
Right.
So a take-home message.
Yeah. So Millie was most focused on the electronic properties of various materials, especially carbon materials that are anything. Well, she started her career focusing on graphite, which is the stuff of pencil lead. And at the time, yeah, there you go. And, you know, at the time, the concept of graphene, which is the actual layers of graphite kind of stuck together, you couldn't really pry apart those layers at that time. And now later in her career, that came to happen, and you know, so she walked through that entire process. But you know, she also helped predict the existence of carbon nanotubes, which are these teeny tiny, sort of like chicken wire shaped molecules that are you know, incredibly strong, incredibly light, and they have really interesting properties in terms of how they can conduct electricity. And there's many, many applications from, you know, plastic additives to the memory in microchips, which, you know, you might have in any kind of computers, cell phone batteries, all of these kinds of things now take advantage of carbon nanotubes. And Millie, you know, she was one of the scientists who not only predicted just their existence, but also how the structure of their atoms would affect how electricity could actually course through their, you know, the structure of it. And, you know, she and her husband, Jean, and husband and scientific partner, Jean, as well as other colleagues predicted, for example, you know, that if the structure, you know, if the atoms were tuned a certain way, then, you know, this would happen with the electricity. And then if they were like slightly twisted this way, like, you know, this structure would be like superconducting versus an insulator. An insulator is something that does not conduct electricity well versus something that is superconducting, which basically has no electrical resistance. So is a really good conductor of electricity. She also, one of the examples I give in the book is she showed, she and some of her colleagues sort of disproved this idea of where the electrons and another kind of carrier of charge in graphite is. And basically she proved that everybody else had been working on this system that was actually inverted, in the sense that people were using a model in which electrons were in one place and these other charge carriers called holes were in another place. But in fact, they were completely reversed. And, you know, that's one of the examples that she gives often as something that she really was proud of, because she really overturned like the established science of how this material worked and how electricity would actually go through it. And, you know, that takes some confidence. And
Yeah.
and she and her colleagues were willing to kind of be embarrassed about it, because people actually came and said, you know, we already know the structure. How can you say it's opposite? But through their diligent research, they realized it was in fact opposite. And she went to the mat, and turns out she was right. And basically now the structure that everyone works with is that was gleaned through that particular experiment, or set of experiments. So, you know, she worked in so many different ways. I mean, toward the end of her career, she was working on 2D materials, not only graphene, so graphene is basically carbon-based, very extremely flat, like one atom flat layer of carbon atoms. But she was also looking at phosphorine, which is analogous to graphene, but it uses phosphorus molecules. And she just was working in so many different realms, and she gave so many ideas to her students and her colleagues and her postdocs. And in many cases, those people would go off and create a whole new subfield based on like some idea that she had. And that's another example of her influence, not just the actual research she did, but just these ideas that she had. And she said, you should work on this. And they would, and then they would come up with some really interesting discovery.
Well, that's why she's called the Queen of Carbon. And to conclude our chat, I have one quick question. What is the deal with the Queen of Carbon always wearing Nordic knitted sweaters? I want to know what the story is of her dress code, because that was her signature.
Well, she wore them towards the end of her career, and I think she was given one as a gift. And, you know, they were comfortable and they were warm. I think she had a couple of them though. One was this red one. And, you know, one of her granddaughters mentioned to me that, you know, she really wanted to stand out as being like a woman in her field, and that people could know that she meant business. And also she could just be seen and like, you know, easily spotted at a conference. Like, there's Millie, there's her red sweater. And it just was a marker for her. And again, she didn't always wear the red one. Sometimes she wore, you know, whatever else, like whether it
The
was the
white
white
one.
one from the book. That's right. She wore that one pretty often. But, you know, she became known for these things. And so people would know
Exactly.
to seek her out. And so that's my understanding anyway.
Well, that's I get it. I totally get it. The standing out. I find it endearing that it's these Nordic sweaters. But thanks for clarifying this very important question
Sure.
right at the end. I believe we're going to hand over for the audience questions now.
Sounds great. Thanks, Anna.
So thank you, Maya,
Yes.
for telling us, and look forward to hearing questions.
Okay. People seem to be a little shy right now, but there are a couple of questions. In fact, one just came through. First question comes from Anita. So she says, the event description for this Zoom mentioned Weinstock explores the basics of Dresselhaus's work in carbon nanoscience, accessibility and engagingly. Would reading this book give a layperson a fair chance to grasp the pith of Millie Dresselhaus's work?
Absolutely. So I actually wrote this book, and it's a great question. Thank you. As I kind of mentioned briefly earlier, it was a little bit of a process of deciding what the audience was going to be for this book. And, you know, I have a little bit of a background in adult science writing, and I also have a little bit of an adult background in children's science writing. And so I knew that this was not going to be fully a children's book, but I did wanted to make it accessible to younger readers as well. So I would say that anybody with probably like 8th or 9th or 10th grade background should be able to understand it. There are definitely some areas that are a little bit more complicated, but I try to go through those as simply as possible. And you know, that means, of course, that anybody who's on this, you know, call, or anybody who reads the book who is a nanoscientist who has studied carbon, you know, you're not going to learn anything special here, because I don't go into anything super complicated. So yes, I would say it should be pretty accessible to even people who are just have a passing interest in carbon nanoscience.
Okay. And then the next question here is from Joseph, who asks, was there anything you particularly enjoyed or found particularly challenging about the process of writing your first book as compared to shorter form pieces?
Absolutely. And, you know, when I first talked with my colleagues at the MIT Press about like how long this was going to take me, you know, I based it on my writing of another chapter in a book that was about women in science. And I had the whole weekend to write it. And it took me one weekend, and I wrote the chapter, and it was great. And that just did not happen with this book. And I sort of extrapolated a little bit. So I think just, you know, I didn't really know just how in depth Millie's background was, and just how many citations she had, and just how many, you know, colleagues she had that she worked with, and friends that she connected with, and just how much influence she had. It made me really have to go through so much more information and filter through to figure out what was going to work the most. And then, you know, of course, I did actually do some interviews with her family, with former students, former colleagues, and things like that. And so, you know, that was something that I was not envisioning was going to take quite so long. Plus, again, you know, I do have a full-time non-book writing job. So squeezing everything in at the end of the day and at very late nights. In many cases, it was early mornings, and I am not an early riser, unlike Millie. Millie was happy to have very little sleep, but that is not me. So that was a little challenging, but it was totally worth it though. So thank you for asking.
All right. And then the next question comes from Xenia, who asks, what is your favorite Millie story that is in the book?
My favorite Millie story is probably one that people would not really think of with Millie, which is when she was a little girl, or when she was a young sort of middle school to young teenager, she just was clearly very interested in life and wanted to explore life as much as possible. And she lived in the city, and she had an opportunity to kind of go around and just explore. But she had very little money. She basically had no money. And so you learn that at a certain point, she figured out a way to sneak into the Hayden Planetarium, which is the famous planetarium in New York City. And she just did it all the time. And she said that she knew everything in the museum and in the Museum of Natural History. And she would do the same thing with Broadway shows. She figured out a fail-safe way to get into Broadway shows without getting caught. And, I mean, we don't condone like sneaking in today, but, Millie, it was just an early example of if you place a barrier in front of Millie, like she's going to jump over that barrier. And, it also just showed that she was really interested in all facets of culture. So that was just, kind of an anecdote that makes you smile.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now that you mention it, I think it was easier to sneak into stuff like that. I've heard stories of people getting into a movie theater with one ticket and staying the whole day,
right.
Decades ago. So there aren't, okay, another question. What was this is from Laura, and she asks, what was the thing or things you learned about Millie that surprised you the most?
Well, one of the things that really surprised me that I did not know about is just how essential the role of music played in her life. From the time when she was young, in the sense that she went to this music school that really changed her outlook on life. But then also like later on, just throughout her entire life, she played the violin and, used music and chamber groups to really connect with her colleagues, with her family, with her friends. It was her main hobby. And, her brother actually was more of a virtuoso. He both was sort of this prodigy when she was growing up, but then also like later became like a concertmaster with his local group. And so Millie was probably not, a concertmaster level, like she didn't have that kind of dedication, but she was dedicated in another way, which is, it didn't have to be like, Carnegie Hall level playing, but she really wanted to make sure that she had music as a part of her life, and making music with others was really just incredibly important to her. I actually did have an opportunity to visit the house that she lived in with her husband and her family. It's actually close to here in Arlington, Massachusetts. And, even today, there's still like music stands and just all over her living room. So it was very clear that music was just super central to her life. There was one anecdote in the book that one of her students told me that, she, or I don't remember if she told me or if it was at the symposium that she gave, but Millie would offer to play at MIT before like an engineering conference or something. And, that was unheard of before she would do it. So that was definitely surprising to me.
Okay. And then we have a question comment from Ruth, who says, I am wondering how involved or not Dr. Dresselhaus was in the MIT study of women's science faculty in the 1990s.
In the 1999 study? That's a really good question. I don't actually know. She was not one of the main. So this is just for anybody who doesn't know. In the late 1990s, a group of female science faculty got together and were taking a look at opportunities that they had versus opportunities that some of their male colleagues had, and really comparing, what was going on in terms of the space that they had, the salaries that they had, and things of this nature. And they ultimately came up with a really influential report that showed that there was unintentional but clear bias towards their male colleagues. And there was a group of, I can't remember how many, I think it might be 16 or so female faculty, and Millie was not one of the people who was really on a key driver on that. She was very involved early on in her career with furthering the cause of acceptance of women at MIT, like literally in terms of their being accepted as students, but also just generally like the climate for women at MIT. And I get the sense that she, at that time, by the late 90s, was probably ready for sort of the next generation to kind of take what had been done by she and some of her other colleagues and kind of, keep going with their own work. And so I don't know exactly why she wasn't on that. But I don't believe that she was one of the main, I'm pretty sure she was not one of the drivers of that important study.
Okay. Now, I think that was the last question. So I guess my question would be then, what kind of projects are you working on now? What's next?
Well, I am going to take a big break after this one. I always have something in the hopper. I'm actually very likely to teach another version of, I taught a history of women in science and engineering class at MIT back in right before I started writing the book. But I haven't had a chance to teach it since then. And I was thinking of teaching it this fall, but I haven't been able to get it all coordinated and get, all the planning for that. So I'm likely to teach that next spring. We'll see, but that's something I would like to do. I always have more Lego projects in the hopper at some place. I am also going to go on some kind of vacation. Like now that, I'm vax boosted, we've been past the Omicron wave. I think it's time for some kind of getaway to a warm location, which I haven't had in God knows how many years. But yeah, that's it for right now. I'm sure I will have other fun activities coming up, but yeah.
And from one Lego fan to another, what is your favorite I guess kit that's on the market? Because I know there's some really great ones out there.
Yeah. Well, obviously, for those who don't know, I actually one of the kits was initiated by me, and so that would probably have to be my favorite. But beyond that, in terms of ones that are available now, let's see. I actually just was in the Lego Ideas contest again, and got my current idea into the finalists, but did not make it into the final round, or I just did not win the contest. But as a consolation prize, you get to actually pick a couple of sets to take home. So I was just looking through a bunch of the sets. There's a Fender guitar, which looks pretty cool. There's I still have not made there's a really beautiful space shuttle that has the Hubble Space Telescope with it. That was my number one choice, if they still have them in stock. So yeah, there's lots of other ones, but what's yours?
Well, I've been eyeing the Colosseum and the Titanic, but
Those are big.
I bought the Aston Martin DB5 for my significant other.
That's pretty good. That's pretty cool. I almost got for my brother, who's a big Barca fan. There's a beautiful Camp Nou, which our family's from Barcelona, so the stadium, which is very similar in size to the Coliseum stadium. So it's like the soccer stadium, but didn't pull the trigger on that one, but maybe someday yet we will.
Supposedly there's supposed to be a Vincent van Gogh Starry Starry Night one coming out, but I haven't seen any updates.
It's in the works. It's in the works, but it's not out yet.
Yeah. Well, okay, everyone.
Actually, let me say one other thing though, and that is because it's related. So thankfully with the MIT Press and with permission from Millie's family, we actually have made a very small run of Millie minifigs. And so MIT Press is going to be running a contest to win a copy of the book and a copy of Minifig. I don't remember exactly how many they're giving out, but if you follow them and you can, I don't remember when they're putting it out there, but it's going to be pretty soon, maybe tomorrow, I'm not sure. You can try to win one. I'm also having a separate contest on my social channels, so you can try to win one there too.
That is fantastic.
Definitely join and try to get one. Maya made me one when my book launched. I brought that today.
Oh, I love that.
Get an original while you can. And go buy her book and gift it to all your friends. They will have a good time reading it, especially over summer, if it ever comes to Boston.
Well, and yes, as I mentioned earlier, you can buy the book. I posted a link in the chat. You can also find Anna's book at the same link as well, and of course the event if you want to register for any others. And I just want to thank everybody for joining in on the on this talk, and especially thank you to Maya and Anna for joining us at Belmont Books tonight. And I am really looking forward to reading the book.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Maya.
Thanks, Anna.
Congratulations. And to everyone, a good night.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And